This is episode 620 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Carlos Garcia. He is of the Garcia Automotive Group, and now the Gessing family has two Hondas from Garcia Honda, but they're not just a Honda dealer, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But welcome back to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Carlos.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm an avid listener, so it's fun to be on. I particularly enjoyed the Doug Peterson episode and the Senator Bill Tallman episodes recently.
Yeah, Peterson is great. He is obviously one of the most outspoken people in this city of Albuquerque about the crime issues. And you all, at least your Honda dealership is right there at Wyoming and Lomas, which just say you get some interesting folks wandering up and down that particular street.
Yeah, we have a lot of the similar challenges that Doug has, because we also own a lot of property downtown, so we see some of that. Although I'm people always say I'm crazy, but I always say just go walk downtown. It's really nice, and it's not anywhere near what it's made out to be. And my wife and I went to the Lyle Lovett concert the other night and parked downtown and went to the 505 food hall for dinner. I mean, we didn't see anything that was out of the ordinary that you wouldn't have in a nice city, but the vacant buildings tend to be a problem. And then the one that Doug has there on San Pedro in Central, I mean, that takes a lot of courage to own property over there. So our stuff on Lomas is a challenge enough, but
Yeah.
It's hard on anyone that's a property owner, and things just getting stolen. I have a good friend of mine who just opened it's like a legal. She's a lawyer, but she has a practice that helps kids that have some family issues and things like that, and therapy, and they really have had incredible results with these kids. And they move in this building on a shoestring budget, and some people come in and steal their air conditioning units. They have the video, they have the license plate, and the police won't do anything. And it's just frustrating, because I'm a huge supporter of the police, and I think they do a good job, and I like the chief. But when you have something where there's that lack of response, it's just so difficult, because nobody likes that, and we certainly don't need that here. We've got to figure something out.
No, absolutely. And I can only imagine the security challenges of car dealerships with all those, multi-thousand-dollar, 10, 20, 30, $40,000 pieces of property sitting out on your dealership lot, no matter what part of town. I mean, you can build a fence, you can do a lot of different things, and that obviously has to be balanced in terms of the you want it to be an inviting location to come people. Nobody wants to, feel like they're going from East Berlin to West Berlin just to buy a car, right?
Yeah, I mean, we invest heavily in our facilities, so our places are really nice, and we try hard to keep them up and keep them clean and everything. But we up there on Lomas, I mean, we've been up there my whole life. There's some interesting stuff that continues to happen and has happened over the years. And our cars protecting our inventories, one thing, but it's definitely another, because we have so many customers bringing their cars to us, hundreds and hundreds of cars every day. So protecting people's cars that they're trusting with us for service, we've got to be super careful. And so that's really our major concern.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So definitely that security issue permeates our city and sometimes our state, but definitely the city of Albuquerque for sure.
Yeah, and it's spreading into areas now that, I was up at Academy in Wyoming the other day and saw some stuff that, I never thought that you would ever see in the Heights, and it's spreading everywhere pretty quickly, and been in some parts of town where you never saw anything, and now you're seeing some of these encampments, and there's the unhoused. I was properly educated the other day on an Instagram fight with somebody, so I'm not blaming the unhoused, but There have been a lot of encampments in areas that are on private property and on the public right of way, and those are just two violations of the law, and it's just frustrating, especially as I want to walk down the street with my kid, as you do, Paul, with your kids. Your kids go to school downtown. You don't want to have to step over a tent or have someone throw something at you. That's just not fair, and it's not right. And people blocking sidewalks and streets and camping out on private property. I have a problem with that. And although I want to help people as much as I can, there's got to be some type of middle ground where the public right of way and private property are protected.
Well, we're here over 600 episodes, and if you or any of our listeners want to go and listen to some great conversations about homelessness and the unhoused, or whatever you want to call them, Judge Glock, great name there, Mr. Judge Glock he spoke at an event year and a half ago, here in Albuquerque, and is really a knowledgeable expert on the homeless situation, not just here in New Mexico and Albuquerque, but across the entire country. Somebody who has some real solutions for folks. So, these episodes don't go bad after a few months or anything. They continue to be out there in the electronic domain. So we're going to get into, obviously, the big topic that we have been talking to Carlos about, which is the governor's mandates on electric vehicles, 43%. Now, before we dive into this, so we're basically 2 years out from the 2026 model year rolling out. Is that as
yes.
you okay? So 43% of vehicles sold in New Mexico in a couple years will need to be electric according to these regulations, right?
Right.
Okay, so what is the latest on that? I know there was some appeals that were attempted, and unfortunately those were rejected, but that was something that was very much attempted and worked on by you and the New Mexico Auto Dealers Association. It did not go the way you or I would have wanted it to, but talk a little bit about that.
So since we talked last, we had filed a motion for stay to stay the EV mandate decision that was done last November and then put into place at the end of December of 23. So we had filed a motion for stay with the Environmental Improvement Board and the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County we'll just call them the Air Board because it's a long name. And lots of interesting things happened along the way. I know we don't have a ton of time, but the story keeps getting better and better when you hear what happens. But so we filed a motion for stay, and we ultimately had a hearing in March where the EIB was going to hear our motion for stay, and at the very last minute, the Air Board was able to tack on to that hearing. They had really not done anything in terms of even wanting to hear the motion for stay, so I think their intent was to let it lapse because I think if they didn't do anything after 60 days, our motion for stay would just be unheard, which would have been fine because there's virtually no chance that you could even get a vote from that board. And so we and our position on the motion for stay was really, and you and I have talked about what happened, and I briefed one of your groups kind of what happened in the vote when we lost initially in November. It was a 3-2 vote that was very close, and there were some very suspicious circumstances in how we lost that vote, in the last couple minutes of the deliberation there, but it was very close, and obviously it wasn't a slam dunk for either side that was on the EIB board, and I thought they did a great job in hearing our case and asking great questions. And so because the timeline was so rushed from when the governor announced this on the no news weekend of July 4th weekend last year, and having to get it voted on and have the hearing done and, rush it in so nobody would notice, so much more information daily was coming out on this on a national level and really on a local level of what was going on. And the more awareness that people had about what was going on, the opposition was growing. The more legislators of ours that found out what was going on, there was more opposition on both sides. Senator Tallman was not one of those people, and he personified. He got up and it was so proud that he went out of state to buy his EV. I said, well, there's the problem. You can't even support a New Mexico business, that's just trying to get by, and you're going to go to some other state and buy an EV and blame the car dealers. Oh, I couldn't find it, when there's, a tremendous amount of availability out there. It was funny how many people in their public comment, the few that were in support of the mandate, I went out of state and bought my EV. So as a local business person, and a small business person, and especially when you're selling cars, you really don't want to hear someone say that they went out of state to buy something. That's one of those things that just always puts a burr in your saddle, no matter what. But
right.
So we filed this motion for stay. We went up to Santa Fe and we had a hearing, and basically what our position was in the motion for stay was, let's just put the brakes on it and see what happens, because the EPA still had not, and they still haven't, granted the waiver for the state of California. A couple other states that were adopting this had turned, had gone the other way. I think one was Rhode Island and the other one was maybe Vermont or Connecticut or something like that. Those two states that were going to follow this, their legislature turned one over, and the governor turned one over because he realized that he wasn't going to win. So they fell. Those were two more states that dropped off. So because everything was so rushed and there was so much more information, it was really just, let's take another look at it. Then let's just pump the brakes, and we're not telling you to vacate the rule or that you weren't, right in how you voted or anything, but let's just take another look at it and try to get some more answers and clarification, because there were so many questions that were unanswered in those hearings because of I felt the lack of the preparation on the state side. But it was something that was so new that nobody anywhere really, I think there are a lot of flaws in the California one that they've been working on for years, and there were just way more questions than answers. And then our position was, we're not here to retry what happened in November. It's the case for a stay has to show irreparable harm to your business, and it's blatantly obvious that there is irreparable harm if we go through with this mandate. I mean, the harm that it's already causing to the entire automotive industry is undeniable. So our position was, hey, we're not here to re-argue the case that we did in November. We just want to talk about the irreparable harm and why we should have this decision should be stayed. And then it was so funny, the other side, they started to, so our whole argument was in November was, it was a pretty basic argument of readiness and preparation, and so that was our argument. And then they came in and used our entire argument and said, oh, we're not here to retry the case. Well, that's exactly what they tried to do. So anyway, we lost in that one also in the motion for stay. Irreparable harm is tough to prove, but and I'm sure you've gone over some of these cases before. It is hard to prove, although if you just look at it at the most basic level, it's pretty obvious that not just franchise auto dealers, but there's a lot of business people and New Mexicans and other people, that are going to have negativity from this. But the irreparable harm to the business and the industry, I think, was pretty clear. And the other side tried to make it a lot more complicated than it was and confuse the boards, which I think they did because our argument was pretty basic. So anyway, we lost that. And I'll tell you the quick story here was I was prepared to, I had like a half hour to speak or something like that, and I had a really well-crafted argument up there. Well, this was on like March 21st was our hearing. Well, our March 20th, the EPA and President Biden slashed their target for U.S. electric vehicle adoption from 67% in 2032 to as little as 35%. That was the day before our hearing. Okay, so all we kept having to listen to was, oh, the EPA is so great, they're on it, they know all these things. This is what the state and their experts kept presenting in the hearing. And I got up there and said, there's really nothing I should say. The president and the all-knowing EPA yesterday slashed these numbers basically in half in their targets, and then they opened up looser regulation for hybrid vehicles to try to close the gap and solve the problem, which was the entire basis of our argument in November was hybrid vehicles are the stepping stone solution until we figure out the long-term solution with EVs or hydrogen or whatever this other technology is. If the EPA is slashing it in half, shouldn't we as New Mexico just say, hey, if the EPA and the president think we should put the brakes on it, shouldn't we put the brakes on it too? And that was, I really didn't need to say anything else after that, because if the country and the EPA is saying, hold on a second, shouldn't we? Well, of course not. We're New Mexico. We know better. We're going to keep pushing forward with something that can't work for anybody and not follow any type of, all we heard was how great the EPA was, and now the EPA is slashing their number, but we're going to keep following the course with California. It was a real head scratcher to me, because that was something, the article I just read you was from NPR. It's not a one-sided thing. They very clearly slashed their EV targets and gave the auto manufacturers other ways to try to hit the total emissions reduction targets that they have, which it was far more reasonable. And the win for the left on this was, and I'm not a political person, I'm an independent. I say that just as an identifier for the political issues. They said it was a huge win because they're the most restrictive emissions control whatever that was put out, and that's great. We all want cleaner air, but this gave the auto manufacturers and the car buying public a lot more flexibility to try to help the country get to that point. It wasn't a win. It just shifted some numbers around and took all that pressure off of the EV. And then one of the secretaries said, this is not a mandate. Well, they know the writing's on the wall for them, because it was all announced in Michigan, because the auto workers and the union who Biden just marched with are up in arms about these EV plants and job cuts and all these other things. And he had to do something to try to appease that swing state. And, that's what happened. And it ended up, that's good for the New Mexicans and car buying public and everything in an overall picture, but it doesn't help us in terms of this mandate. So it was really just unfortunate that because the stay, we weren't at that point, we're not asking them to overturn anything. It's just, hey, let's wait a year, or let's do something. Let's look at it. Let's get some more people in here that are smarter than us and see how we implement it, because everything we heard was, and I'm sorry, if you have a question, you can answer, because I just talk and you don't have to say anything. But there are two things I'll just point out from this appeal hearing. These were my two major things that happened from November to March. One was EV sales are so hot, they're exploding, it's going crazy, everybody wants them. We heard this from every person that was in support of this thing. They haven't moved, they've actually gone down. Tesla, for the first time ever, missed their sales objective for the quarter. Their financial results were nowhere close. I use them as an example because everyone can agree that Tesla's the largest electric car maker and they're a solid company. But in New Mexico, we just kept hearing, oh, they're hot, everybody wants them. Well, there were tons of availability, and our sales rate is decreasing. It's still around 4%. So to get from 4% to 43 in a couple of years, Paul, that's the sales have to go up 1,000 times.
Right.
It's just crazy. Right? Because, most people trying to do math, when I tell them that, well, to go up 100% would move it to 8. So if we've got to go to 43, it's 10 times that. It's 1,000% our EV sales would have to go up just to hit this bottom threshold. California's, there's more than have to double. That's not going to happen. Colorado has to go up, 700 times. That it just can't happen from demand, production, auto manufacturers. So there was that. And then the other thing that, if you go back and watch the tape, we heard over and over and over again from the governor's administration, all the state, we're going to have, and I heard the governor say when I spoke at a symposium last year, earth-shattering incentives for EVs, right? This is what's going to make everybody buy these cars. Because at that time, California had spent a couple $2 billion on EV incentives. We had nothing. Colorado had some good incentives. There were parts of California where there were $20,000-$30,000 in EV incentives, all taxpayer money, mind you, right? So I don't know how much money you guys got when you were starting your businesses, but I'm guessing it wasn't, $20,000 per unit to try to move your product.
Right.
And they, broad sweeping changes, these huge incentives, we're just going to crush it, and we're going to give all these incentives. Well, the legislative session rolls around. What do we get? And so I was on another show with the head of the Sierra Club, and I like her very much, and we had a conversation afterwards about the EV incentives, and she said she was going up to Santa Fe for the short session, and I said, well, you need to ask for $15,000 a car and hope to get 10, because it's going to take at least 10 to move the needle. And as a dealer, of course, I want the incentives, right? I'll sell more cars and service more cars. And if we're going to get hosed as taxpayers anyway, it might as well be for something that
benefits your bottom line.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
There's what's wrong with a large incentive, and so I said ask for 15 and hope to get 10, because 10 I think would have moved it in the right direction. Certainly not going to close the gap with all the other issues, and I don't want to bore you to death with that. But we got $3,000, Paul. $3,000 does nothing, right. and it reduces to $1,500 and then goes to zero in a couple years. And then we're going to do it on used electric cars and hybrids. Well, of course, they did nothing for hybrids, and then the used vehicle one is half of that, so I think it's $1,500. That doesn't do anything, right? I mean, my family sold tens of thousands of cars. I will tell you that a $3,000 incentive is, it sounds like a lot, but in terms of monthly payment, it's really not changing a whole lot for most people, especially when you factor in having to install a charger in your house and all these things. So we went from the governor saying, we're going to have earth-shattering incentives, and we're going to be a leader and not a lagger, right? How many times did we hear that in the hearing? New Mexico is going to be a leader. Well, we went from having no incentive to having the smallest incentive in the country. After all that we heard of every great thing that the legislature was going to do, we got $3,000 on new EVs. It's capped by your income. It's capped by a window sticker. So at the time I looked at the day that came out, there was not one Ford Lightning truck in the state of New Mexico that would have qualified for that incentive, right? F-150 Ford is the number one selling car in New Mexico. It's been that way for 30-some years. So truck doesn't qualify. A limited number of vehicles fell under this restriction. So we really got nothing after all that and all the promises and all the hype and hoopla that I think both of the boards relied on heavily, that the legislature was going to do this. And I said, my whole thing with our attorneys was every single thing that the other side was talking about in the hearings is speculation, speculation, speculation. Incentives, EV chargers, infrastructures, cost of vehicles, interest rates are going to go down, all these other things. Our whole base for our case was everything they're talking about is based purely on speculation. Ours is based on real data. And then the opening argument from the state's attorney was, the auto dealers, everything they're saying is based on speculation.
Right.
Like, no, that's our argument. You guys are the ones that said that brought in all these crazy numbers that could never happen.
Let's talk about reality and real numbers. You have how many car dealerships? Talk about which different brands you cover. And specifically, I want to know, what are you selling? Are you seeing a trend line of still people buying electric vehicles? A lot of other places, a lot of other dealers and brands seem to be seeing a plateauing or even a decline in EV sales. Tell people what you sell what you're seeing on EVs.
So, I don't claim to speak for every car dealer or be an expert, but you can read the Wall Street Journal and see that the EV sales have plateaued and they're declining for a lot of brands, and the incentives are huge, and there's many things going on. So, as I've said many times, I like the electric cars. We know it's part of our future. We've invested millions of dollars in technology, training, equipment, because we know that it's coming. We know it's a big part of our future. So right now, we have Mercedes-Benz and Santa Fe. They have 6 different electric models that, they have sedans, SUVs, a really broad product line. I think they have the broadest EV product line out there. They have more models than Tesla. And at the beginning, obviously in Santa Fe, you're going to sell some EVs. So It was pretty popular. The Mercedes, I feel like they're a little expensive, but they're great cars. They have a couple models that I think fall in the right price category. So they're, we do okay with those. And then we have Subaru has one model that we sell that's been a little tough to move. Nissan, we're not a Nissan dealer. They have one model that's been tough to sell. Toyota has one. I mean, a friend of mine who's a dealer says she's had one for a year. I know the Nissan dealers were sending truckloads of them out, losing several $1,000s a car to move them to states where they thought that they could sell. But for us, the one that's been the real bright spot with the EVs is the Cadillac Lyriq. It is a fantastic vehicle, and it's priced so well. And we actually sell a lot of them. The customers love them, and there's lots of options on them. And
SUV?
It's a crossover, but it's more like a car, but it's a hatch. So I guess technically it's like we would call it a wagon, but it's like a
Don't say that word.
Yeah. Only in Subaru can you say wagon and people like it, but it's I think technically it's considered a crossover, but it's more of a car. And we've done really well with that car, and I've sold a lot of them personally to people, and so it seems to me that if you have something that is priced close to a gas or hybrid powered equivalent that offers the same amount of features that people want, and a decent amount of range, those cars seem to be moving. It's the super expensive ones have really slowed down. I mean, obviously Tesla keeps dropping their prices, and the truck obviously helped them. But even in the quarter where the truck launched, their deliveries still dropped because the other cars were dropping. So Cadillac is really the one, and Mercedes are the two that we have where there's a broad spectrum. We're waiting for our first electric Honda called the Prologue. It's supposed to be coming, I think, any day. And then we have a couple brands that don't have any. And then we have the Alfa Romeo that has a plug-in hybrid, which is, I think, probably the best solution to all this. So, we do have a good, wide selection of these things.
Now, when we bought our minivan from you, a Honda Odyssey 2024, we looked at a Toyota. Sienna is the minivan there, and Toyota is moving to hybrid technology. And we could talk if you want about the way. I mean, the Japanese car dealers have obviously over my lifetime gobbled up market share year after year after year, partially because their added advantage is their motors are spectacular. They're efficient. They run well. And they run for a very long time. Honda being the same way. My wife and I, we kind of penciled out the gas savings of the hybrid that the Sienna, and the $10,000 extra cost for the hybrid, and we just decided that it didn't make sense for us. I'm sure it's a fantastic vehicle, but the hybrid, and I'm just talking regular old hybrid.
We appreciate you keeping your money local, because none of the Toyota stores they're all publicly traded companies. So we appreciate you keeping your money local.
Well, thanks. Happy to do that. And, of course we have a relationship as well, and that always helps. But, it does seem like hybrids, not regular old. I mean, it's a 25 year old technology, right. But that does seem to be an increasingly popular thing. But the federal government and the state of New Mexico are just not interested in hybrids, even though they are a much more efficient vehicle. Can you talk about how this doesn't make sense?
So it's a huge miss that the traditional hybrid is not considered in this class of very fuel efficient vehicles, and it was a big mistake that California didn't include it in their rule, and that as such, New Mexico couldn't do it, add ours in there, unfortunately. But as I've said, the hybrid, they're only slightly less efficient when you look at the overall picture of all the environmental factors. And I'm not going to get into the article I read about all the kids in Indonesia dying mining the batteries for the EVs today. We'll save that for another topic. But when you look at the overall emissions and tailpipe emissions, hybrids are very close in overall efficiency to an EV. So my argument has been it's a logical stepping stone, because that leap from a gas car to an EV is a huge one for just about anybody, unless you have 2 or 3 cars and you have a very limited use for the vehicle. So the hybrid is a great stepping stone, because my thing that I've tried to get people to understand is if we replaced every internal combustion gas car today with a hybrid, we solve so many of our tailpipe emission problems in the entire United States, right? So and we plainly said this to the EIB and the Air Board over and over. You guys have to include hybrids in your state incentives. We should try to make a change to the California rule that hybrids be included, because at that time, and we pointed this out. So when I look at the automobile industry, the companies that I think are run the best, you look at Toyota, Mercedes-Benz, and Honda, right? So if you watch those companies and you sort of follow what they're doing, they don't make very many mistakes, right? So when you look at Toyota and Honda's hybrid production, Toyota was obviously the innovator in hybrid, but both of them have really broad product lines with hybrids. They fly off the shelves. Ford has been going crazy with hybrid. So, and the problem with a mandate is it doesn't take in real consumer demand. So what people are buying on their own is hybrids. That's what they want. That's where the market's going. It is a plus for the environment that we're replacing older, higher polluting vehicles with hybrids until we get to a more viable solution. Huge mistake that wasn't in there. And to me, I don't know why that seems complicated. Hopefully my explanation was pretty simple, but they're very fuel efficient vehicles, and they solve a lot of problems, and then people don't have to have range anxiety and charge anxiety, and they can do their part to help the environment and keep their costs down. Hybrids are just a great solution. We sell at our Honda store every one that we get. They sell right away, and I know the Toyota guys are the same thing, and same thing going on at Ford. So it was a real head scratcher to me that hybrids are not a major part of the picture in this, because they're a great interim solution until we get a grasp on whatever this next zero emissions reality is going to be.
Well, as a policy practitioner, not an automotive guy, I'll say that I believe the radical environmental groups call the tune. California's just going along with it, and the radical environmentalists completely oppose traditional sources of energy, and hybrids do rely on gasoline engines as part of the mechanism to make those vehicles go. So they want to destroy traditional automotive technology. So that's why they're going that direction. And I don't know what I know the Biden administration, their plans are more nuanced. And I want to talk a little bit about those next, because we've tended to focus justifiably on New Mexico and our rules and regulations. But the Biden administration, as you said, imposed some rules, not as aggressive as New Mexico, and then they dialed even those back. Obviously, we're in a presidential election year. Those rules could change dramatically, or if Biden does get reelected, that could be a real factor. Talk about the federal role here, though, and how you see these federal regulations impacting the industry, because it's one thing for 10, 12 states to do this. If they do all 50, that's a different kettle of fish, right?
Right.
So just talk about that.
Yeah, I think that regardless of who wins in the presidential election, I think it would be hard for anybody to do anything for all 50 states in terms of approaching anything like California does. So, my understanding was the reason why the California Clean Cars Act was put in place was the EPA didn't want to get 50 different proposals for what each state wanted to do. So they said, well, we'll just go with California's, which, to me makes no sense because California, as you said, what 1 in every 8 Americans lives in California. Is that what you said the last time? I mean, California is not a valid comparison for any state. They're really their own world and their own country. So, if it's me, I look at the whole picture and look at averages and look at things. I mean, you can't have one extreme or the other, to decide all of your policies. But I think by seeing I definitely think that the EPA and the Biden administration backed that down. Obviously, the first reason was it was very political for them, and the polling and all that stuff. Plus,
election year.
Plus, what was going on in Michigan. I mean, I'm still surprised. I'm still convinced that interest rates are going to get dropped heavily before the election to try to give Biden a boost. That I think that just has to happen. But this decision to change their restrictions. I think that, so what we do have now is you either have the California plan or you have the federal plan. So that's, I think, what you're asking. So if for states like Texas, Arizona, Florida, Tennessee, all these other states that aren't going with the California plan, there's the federal plan, which we've all been on for lots of years and we've been on forever here in New Mexico. I think that the consumer demand and the lack of demand really, even forgetting that it's an election year, I think the EPA and the Biden administration realized that their targets were too aggressive because A, the consumers don't want them, and B, the auto manufacturers just can't hit those numbers. And so one of my major things, without me having to talk for 3 hours about it, is, like I said, Toyota doesn't make many mistakes. The chairman of Toyota, 3 days before our appeal hearing, said, look, we would rather, he basically said, nobody wants EVs. The demand is so weak. We'd rather pay the penalty in California and other states than build a bunch of cars that people don't want and put a bunch of money into EV research that isn't going to yield us any fruit at the end of the day. So between the CEO or the chairman of Toyota saying that and the EPA dropping their restrictions, I mean, who else do you need to hear from that knows about this? So that was really an alarming one to me because they don't make many mistakes. So they're saying they would rather pay the penalty than build a bunch of cars that people don't want. Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. Why is this industry being subjected so heavily to something totally arbitrary that's very, very important to, like you said, radical environmentalists or a limited group of people that are going to dictate and put up, hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer money to try to make this thing go? The EV industry is a false industry. It's a part of the automotive industry, and I think it's going to get there, but right now it's not there. And by 82% of cars having to be EVs by 2032, it's not going to get there. So I'm guessing that I don't think Biden will make them tougher if he wins again, and I don't think Trump will cause a big stink at the EPA to erase the California restrictions. It seems like he tries to keep his nose out of California a little bit. But, I mean, look at Texas and Arizona, our two bordering states. They're going to be the biggest beneficiaries in the world. And Nevada, everybody from here is just going to go buy a car there. It solves no problem.
Okay, well, that lot of great information.
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that you did. And I want to ask one more before we wrap things up. There's been a lot of talk, and then the Biden administration came out with tariffs on Chinese-made vehicles. Ironically, the company Build Your Dreams, which completely failed on Central with the buses.
Right.
How concerned are you? Because Elon Musk certainly seems concerned about Chinese electric vehicles coming in. Biden administration seems concerned because they slapped, a 25% tariff on them. Where do you see these Chinese manufacturers? Do you think they're just going to shift their production to Mexico? Or how big of a threat is that to Honda, to Toyota, you and your industry, et cetera? Or are you getting a BYD, Build Your Dreams dealer next in line?
We tried.
Oh, okay.
I'm very concerned about China and their China and their ability to build these EVs. I mean, they've already set up factories in Mexico. They're right over the border. The thing with China and with their the way that they're going to build these cars is the government will subsidize whatever they need to do to get rid of the tariffs to put the cars in the United States. So the tariff really becomes irrelevant because they have so much money that they can just pay the tariff and put the cars in. So I think all they're really waiting for is and they spend infinite money on the technology and everything, but the thing that is hard for a lot of people to understand that aren't in the industry is when something's really cheap, it's always going to sell. So even if it's a really low range, low quality electric vehicle, whoever conquers the $20,000 to $30,000 electric vehicle is probably, and whoever can build a truck, those are the two that are going to win. And none of the legacy automakers are even close to this. But I think the Chinese are figuring out a way, starting at $18,000, to build an EV. And there are a lot of people that want EVs that can't afford them or don't have the charger at home and all these other things. I think part of the problem with EVs being so expensive and the charging anxiety and ability to not charge at home in apartment buildings and rental houses, I think that holds back. I think we would sell more EVs if the total picture of them was more affordable and the range was longer. And like I said, it's going to get there. But the Chinese are just going to come in with something so cheap, and I think they're really going to hurt the legacy automakers once they start selling these cars in the U.S. And a couple of them have already set up shop. There's one that's called VinFast. It's actually a Vietnamese company. I know a fair amount about them, and it's a nice car, and they're priced really well. But those people they're going to start doing some damage, especially in California. So, we always look at the markets I always will look at to tell me what the future is going to hold are Texas, Florida, and California. They're three very dynamic car markets. So obviously Texas and Florida aren't going to matter for EVs, but in California, I think the Chinese are really going to do some damage there. And like I said, their government will eat the whole tariff. I don't think you could put enough of a tariff on them. So, China, and Trump's been the only president in my lifetime that's really stood up to China. Maybe he'll put 100% tariff on it, and maybe that'll keep them away. I don't know. But where they're not going to hurt the Japanese manufacturers as much because they have a much more diversified business model. But the domestic automakers and all these unions that Biden just marched with and got all these new contracts for, they're still going to be building traditional internal combustion cars for a long time. And these EV plants and battery plants that they're building, they have committed all this major money to them, whereas Toyota and Honda, Nissan, these other Japanese companies, they're still trying to keep it in scale. But if China's able to come in, there's a lot of auto manufacturers that are going to go down over this, and they'll be out of business.
Well, interesting. Good luck with everything. It's going to be, I believe it's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times, and we are living in interesting times, especially in the automotive industry. But thanks for your time, and thanks for doing business. And if anything big happens, please let me know.
I will.
All right. Carlos Garcia, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.